Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, this tech talk that we have today about demystifying non-fungible tokens. This is brought to you by the Tech Talk series at INSEAD, the Digital at INSEAD team, and in partnership with Accenture. My name is Pavel Kireyev. I'm a faculty member at INSEAD, and today I will be joined by three panelists who are experts in the non-fungible token space. And together we're going to be discussing how non-fungible tokens can be used by businesses, how businesses can interact with NFTs, and also talking about some of the regulatory aspects of non-fungible tokens. So to begin, let's think about what the audience, how familiar the audience is with NFTs. So I'd like you to answer this poll question. How familiar are you with NFTs? You own NFTs, you're familiar with NFTs, but do not own them, or not familiar with NFTs at all. And once we have all the answers, let's take a look at what this distribution looks like among the audience. Okay, so 6% own NFTs, 46% are familiar but do not own them, and 48% are not familiar with NFTs. This distribution, I think, is representative of what we might see in the general business audience as well, with a few people dabbling with NFTs or maybe quite deeply involved with NFTs. But the vast majority either not at all being familiar with NFTs or being familiar with the concepts, but not actually having entered the market themselves. So hopefully this talk will help you understand a bit better what NFTs are in case you're not familiar with them. And in case you're dabbling with NFTs or thinking of ways of getting into NFTs, we can also provide some insights into how that can be done. So let me start now by giving a short introduction on non-fungible tokens, on this industry, and this will set the stage for the discussion afterwards. Okay, so non-fungible tokens, to start, I'll begin by illustrating the collectibles industry, which is a very big industry in the world. It's estimated to be on the order of 200 to 400 billion US dollars. And this is an industry where people buy and sell rare of a kind physical objects. For example, this baseball card that I have on the left sold for $3 million in 2016. It's a 100-year-old baseball card. In the middle, I have a painting by artist Murakami, which sold for $2.4 million. And on the right, I have Beanie Babies, which were a collectible that was very popular in the United States. And this particular Beanie Baby sold for $10,000 in 2019. Now, what started to happen recently, and what we've seen happening over the past few years, is now people are buying and selling digital items. So not necessarily scarce physical items, but digital items that are scarce also in some way. Here are two examples of some of the high-profile non-fungible token sales that really brought the term into the mainstream last year. On the left is an artwork which sold at Christie's auction house in March. And on the right, I have a CryptoPunk, which sold at Sotheby's auction house. So traditional auction houses have been selling these digital assets, and both of them sold for very significant amounts of money. Now, I should point out that these were paid out not in US dollars, but in a cryptocurrency called Ether. And many of the early buyers of these NFTs were people who were involved in the cryptocurrency industry for a while. So they had perhaps accumulated some cryptocurrencies from early investments and were then sort of spending them to purchase these new digital assets that were not well understood by most people. In addition to that, we've seen some organizations partner with non-fungible token projects in order to issue their own digital assets. These examples that I have here were actually from before 2021, which was the year when NFTs really entered the mainstream. On the left-hand side, we have a baseball digital collectible, in contrast to the physical baseball card that I showed you a few slides earlier. This one sold for about $1,750 in 2019. We have this Formula One racing car. It's a digital racing car, which sold for over $100,000. And on the right, this was the project that made non-fungible tokens sort of enter the mainstream a little bit in 2017, 2018, CryptoKitties. This particular one here sold for $170,000 in 2018. Now, social media companies are also starting to become interested in non-fungible tokens, interested in integrating these digital assets into their platforms in some ways. For example, Twitter recently released a function where if you have an NFT that you use as your profile picture on Twitter, they change the shape of your profile picture into a hexagon to illustrate that indeed you are the owner of this digital item. TikTok has also been getting involved with NFTs. And of course, Facebook recently changed their name to Meta to emphasize the fact that they're entering the metaverse. And many aspects of the metaverse are very closely related to non-fungible tokens, which in many ways can serve as the economic sort of foundation of these types of metaverse platforms. So now, because of this very high level of interest, it's important for businesses that are not tech companies or that are not necessarily in the cryptocurrency space to also be aware of non-fungible tokens, to understand how they can use non-fungible tokens, how they can really make the most of this, and make sure that they do things that are correct and not things that could be harmful to their brand. So by way of introduction, I'll talk a bit about some of the projects that I've worked on related to non-fungible tokens, and then we'll move into the panel portion where the panelists will share their experiences as well. Here I've put together different publications and different papers that we've released on the topic, and I've ordered them by mainstream to more technical and niche publications. At the top, we have this Harvard Business Review article that we published together with Peter, who is one of the panelists today. And this article looks at non-fungible token marketplaces. I think it's a good starting point to get a sense of how brands might think about partnering with different marketplaces, how NFT marketplaces might evolve in the future, what that industry might look like. Then as we go further down, we have a few case studies on this topic. Actually, together with Peter Zemsky and Lisa Duke, we published a case study in 2019, which looked at artificial intelligence avatars on the blockchain. Sounds very similar to NFTs, but the word NFT was not used so much back then. So we actually didn't use it at all in the case. But it's an interesting case to look at to see how companies, even before the recent NFT wave, have been thinking about using similar technologies in some ways. And we also have a new case study forthcoming with a large NFT company, so look out for that. And at the very bottom, in case you're interested in more technical work and more data analysis, here are two research papers which look at data from the blockchain on how people transact non-fungible tokens. And these papers look at questions of pricing and valuation for NFTs. So if you're interested in getting into the data and looking at some numbers, I would recommend checking out those papers as well. So now, what is an NFT? So I'll give a brief explanation here using this slide, and then we'll move on to see what the panelists think about it. Here I have a picture of a CryptoPunk. This was one of the NFT assets that I talked about earlier, part of the same collection that sold through Sotheby's auction house. And effectively, it is a pixelated image of a punk of some kind. Now, historically, markets for images, markets for buying and selling files have existed. For example, stock photos is a market that exists. And of course, you have other types of digital assets that are traded in different ways. But traditionally, the asset downloads, let's say if you're buying a stock photo, are logged by a company. This company is responsible for keeping track of who has the rights to what. And they typically threaten legal enforcement if you do something with this image that you purchased from the company that you're not allowed to do with it. Now, in the context of a blockchain, what happens is the asset creation, ownership, and transfers of it are now no longer stored in a single database managed by the company who is responsible for selling these assets, but rather it's logged in a distributed ledger, which is a blockchain. And that basically means that we have now a large database that's distributed, copies of which are distributed across multiple computers. And all of these computers make sure that each individual one of them, or any actor that comes in and wants to change something in this database, will have a very hard time doing so. That makes it almost impossible for someone to come in and change the contents of this database, because all of these computers have to confirm that the contents are correct. So this structure gives a somewhat stronger sense of ownership over digital things. It's the same structure that's used in cryptocurrencies. The difference with NFTs is that we now can not just store information about transfers of value, but we can also store pieces of data, which can be files, which can be non-fungible pieces of information on these blockchains as well. Now, another thing that's quite interesting is that in the context of NFTs, we can also, for some blockchains, like the Ethereum blockchain, for example, store functions on these blockchains. Functions that tell us the rules of how we can interact with these assets, that can trigger certain events to occur. And these are known as smart contracts in the world of Ethereum. And these functions, for example, in the context of CryptoPunks, can limit the maximum supply that can be the maximum supply of this asset that can ever be released. They can also create conditions such that when somebody sells an NFT to someone else, a portion of the money that is paid goes back to the original creator, and so on. But the bottom line is that the non-fungible token itself is more like a digital certificate of ownership. So it is something on the blockchain. It's a statement which says that this person owns this particular digital asset, which sometimes is stored on the blockchain, sometimes is not stored on a blockchain, but is stored somewhere else. And what people trade are these digital certificates of ownership. Sometimes they can come with IP rights, sometimes not. So that's my brief introduction. Now I'd like to move into the panelists and start with Nathalie. Nathalie, if I could ask you to please introduce yourself and offer a reaction to my explanation of what NFTs are.
Okay, thank you, Pavel, for this perfect introduction. So I'm Nathalie Braz. I'm a law professor at the University of Sorbonne Abu Dhabi, and I'm as well of counsel at the 12 law firm in Paris. So I am working since a long time on digital rights and digital law, data protection, and obviously because I am working as well on civil law and IP law, I am really interested in NFT. So just to have a quick answer to your question, I'm basically agree with your definition. That's a quite good definition. It's a certificate of ownership. But I am not totally agree with the question of the IP rights which can come with the NFT, because I think there is two levels of definition and two levels of qualification. There is a qualification of the NFT himself, so the line of code, basically, and the question of the qualification of the underlying of the object which is coming with the NFT. It could be a proper property rights, but it could be as well a very different sort of rights. So in fact, it depends, and it could be lots of hypotheses, and obviously the definition, the legal definition will follow this qualification of the underlying. So that's my quick question. But I saw in the Q&A that there's a lot of question of the ownership and the rights. So I suppose that we will come back on this after.
Yes, let's definitely come back to it. And thank you very much for your introduction. So next we have Isabelle. Could you please introduce yourself and offer your take on what you think is the most important aspect of defining what an NFT is?
Sure. Hi, hello. I'm Isabelle Bonnet. So I'm an entrepreneur, investor, author, also fascinated by blockchain, and I'm the CEO of Blockchain Solutions. And with my company, we had the chance and the opportunity to work with luxury brands since 2018 on blockchain. How can we use blockchain for corporate use case? And of course, I've been working on the topic of NFT for quite a few years now. And the question of what is an NFT is actually essential to understand how we could, in the end, use those NFT or potentially see them as an opportunity. And what you say that it's digital ownership is true in the sense when you own the NFT in a wallet, this means you digitally own something. And that's actually what we invented with blockchain technology. We invented this concept of digitally owning something, like we own something in the physical world. And NFT are a way to own something that is unique, because other cryptocurrency, crypto assets are fungible. So you can't make a difference between the two of them. And so that's the concept in, as you said, of NFT, and it unlocks a myriad of use cases that are absolutely fascinating and very exciting for brands and people all over the world.
All right, thank you so much, Isabelle. And finally, we have Peter. Peter, if you could please introduce yourself and offer your take on what is an NFT.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Peter Evans. I'm the managing partner at the Platform Strategy Institute. I also have a visiting lecture appointment at Dartmouth, and I'm a course leader at the Caltech Executive Education Program. My background is, well, I've got an academic degrees and whatnot, but I've been doing corporate foresight for the past 15 years. And so I'm always on the look for new innovative kind of developments. And obviously NFTs really came onto the scene last year and became really interesting. So I've been deeply involved both in advising startups as well as doing research. And it was a pleasure to write an article with Pavel for the Harvard Business Review. And we hope we can do some more in the future on that. So I think with NFTs, there's lots of things we could talk about. One is to question, is the NFT the ends or the means? There are lots of things you can do with NFTs that go beyond just the digital representation. They can become part of loyalty programs. They can become part of community building. They can become part of rewards and utility that you provide. So I think it's important to think more broadly, and then also in the context of other things that are happening. So for example, there's the rise of what they call the creator economy. We're seeing a boom in the number of creators and the decentralization of creative activity. We're also seeing the evolution of what they call the experience economy, strong interest in experiences. NFTs can be a vehicle for delivering experiences. You also have the rise of the platform economy and the fact that you're moving a lot of commerce and activity to platforms. NFTs really can't survive without platforms. And then finally, we have the token economy and tokenization. So really, when you think about NFTs, you have to think about them in the context of all these other phenomena that are happening and how NFTs can be leveraged to deliver across these diverse kind of forces that are coming to play, and how brands have to figure out how to navigate this space.
Thank you very much, Peter. So I'd like to actually ask a question from the chat now, from the Q&A. Anonymous attendee is asking, can NFTs grant authenticity of real life assets such as paintings, or they only apply to digital ones? So maybe I can stay with you, Peter, for a bit and ask if you can give us a specific example, if you can think of any, of how NFTs might bridge the real sort of physical divide.
Sure. So I think what's more exciting is the fact that the digital art, music, and things of that nature were suffering from the fact they were easy to copy. And so the rise of NFTs created a vehicle for better assigning value and ownership to the owner and tracking that. Now you can figure out ways of applying NFTs to physical assets. And so they're actually doing that with what they call the rise of digital twins in the manufacturing space, with real estate transactions. There you're really using NFTs as a method of certification and tracking of items. So yes, you can do that one for one, but I'm not sure that's the most exciting application. It's more in this digital realm, which has become kind of a source of huge amounts of value creation.
Thank you, Peter. So I'd like to go to Nathalie next. There's another question here which attempts to clarify a bit what exactly it is that you buy when you buy an NFT. So I'll read this one out loud. I recently bought a unique piece of physical digital art from a well-known NFT artist in Ghana. Very interesting. There's also an NFT of the same piece of work. So I'm guessing it's something where you have an NFT of the physical, where you have a physical item, but you also have sort of an NFT copy associated with that. The NFT owner does not have the rights to the image, which remains with the artist who created that work. So the question is, what is the point of owning the NFT? Aside from being able to look at it online or possibly use it in the metaverse. So one way I might even try to synthesize a bit is if you, let's say, have an NFT, but the NFT comes with no intellectual property rights to the, let's say, physical object associated with it or to the digital image that is associated with it even, is there still a point to having an NFT?
Yeah, I think the important thing to remember is when you are buying an NFT, you are not buying the artwork necessarily. It depends, in fact, it depends if the artwork is joined with the NFT. But basically, when you buy the NFT, you just buy the certificate of authenticity that you are the owner of the thing you join with the NFT. And I use the word of thing because you can join, obviously, a piece of works, but you can also just give, for example, the image of the piece of work or another sort of right, just the right to use or just the right to forbid to reproduce the image. So in fact, you can give with the NFT a lot of sort of right, a bundle of right as well, but you can as well give the right on the physical works. It depends, in fact, of the right you will write in the smart contract you just talked before, and in fact, it will depend on that. So, in the case of the artwork of our Nigerian artist, in fact, it depends. If it just if he bought with the NFT the right on the physical works, obviously he have the IP rights to forbid the use of the physical piece of work. But if he just write, for example, like in the John Lennon case, the picture of the piece of works, obviously it cannot invoke legal enforcement of this use of the piece of work because it don't have the rights. So in fact, as you mentioned, it's a very huge source of new value, this possibility, because it's a way to create a unique digital assets, and in this case there is no problem to admit this unicity of the digital asset, but the link with the rights you give with the digital asset is not so clear because there is a very large amount of situations. So you can give some rights, but you can give nothing. So in fact, it's the big issue with the NFT markets. I saw on the Q&A chat that some says is like you are selling nothing. It could be selling nothing. In fact, it depends of the rights you give with the NFT. The main point is to keep in mind that there is two different things with NFT. There is the digital assets, which is going with the bundle of rights, and there is the underlying, which could be a lot of things, brand, works, and as Peter said, a lots of different things. For example, I don't know, piece of music or graphical piece of work. So in fact, that's the point. It depends. I'm not sure, but I am so clear.
Can I add something?
Yeah, go for it. A lot of artists. Sorry, Peter. I see also in the Q&A there's some discussion about what exactly is the IP associated with NFTs and so on. So please go ahead and
but I would just say that it's up to the artist. The artist can decide if you give away all your rights or you reserve the rights. So it's not that complicated. You just write it into the contract. The thing that I think is more exciting is the fact that the person who bought that NFT may have the opportunity, the artists may give them the chance to be the first person to have the right to buy the next piece of art that they do. So there's lots of benefits that an artist can convey that go beyond just the NFT. They can create a community and reward that community who bought their art with special what they call airdrops of future art, or if they want to do in real life a gallery, they may get a special VIP invitation. They may do a webinar that's only for those holders of the NFTs. So I think we have to think of, again, the difference between the ends and the means. NFTs can be a means for building community and rewarding what they call super fans of those particular creators.
Very interesting.
Yes,
so
but
I'm sorry, Nathalie. Let's move on for now and maybe come back to this. The next step is we're actually going to give some more concrete examples, I think, of how companies have tried issuing NFTs, what kinds of buyers might be interested in them. And I think that might actually help clarify some of these points. And I'll look for your input, Nathalie, as well on that. But for this, I'd like to actually go to Isabelle. You've worked with brands in the space. You've worked with companies that have tried to do projects related to non-fungible tokens. Can you give us some examples of use cases of how a company might benefit from NFTs? What can they do with NFTs?
Sure. So, well, I've worked a lot in the luxury industry, and the luxury industry, they are very interested in everything that is related to art and creativity. So a lot of the first launch were linked to basically digital art, which is a new field that it's not completely a new field actually, because we already had, like, for instance, in some museum, you can see a movie, which is a piece of art, which is already digital art in a way. But digital art, thanks to NFT, completely exploded. And that's probably one of the first things the brands wanted to do, is that they started to convert some of what they were doing into art. So a concrete example. For instance, Gucci, in June, they issued a first NFT that was sold on Christie's. That was a short movie that was made based on their fashion show, actually, Aria. And they created a piece of art of 40 seconds. And it was sold on auction on Christie's. It was the first use case. And this use case is interesting because it's a kind of partnership between commission artists and their own artists, because there was a participation of Alessandro Michele in the project. That's one idea. But we've seen a lot of new cases. So a lot of brands also, they have used arts to do charity also, which is something that brands are very keen on. So we've seen, for instance, Givenchy, that launched a beautiful digital art sale on auction to promote the rights of the LGBTQI community in England. That's an example, but some examples that I see coming also are about the concept of club. And a very successful project that was launched last year was Bored Ape Yacht Club. So some of you might have heard of it, because the sales skyrocketed of the prices of the monkeys. And that's a very interesting, I think, use case that brands might use, because the concept is that if you own an NFT, you become part of a club. And this club exists online, and with NFT, you can actually unlock an online experience and things. And that's a new way of actually interacting on internet. So the old world was having a username and a password that was controlled by a third-party company. And in this new world, you actually have your own wallet that you control with your own NFT in this wallet. And you can have an experience online that is actually pseudonymous and that you control without having a third party controlling your email or anything like that. And that opens a new way for brands and companies and communities to interact with each other.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just stick with you for a bit longer. There was a question in the Q&A. This was by Emily Wells. Emily was asking, what are the reasons to buy an NFT? So in the context of these examples that you gave, from the perspective of the firm, they are selling these NFTs and making money in exchange for it. Sometimes it goes to charity, sometimes it goes back to the business. As a buyer, if I'm somebody who's looking at this kind of a project by a brand or by a company, what are the motivations that I have in order to purchase an NFT?
So it's actually a very good question, because we are talking about something that is fully intangible. and that didn't exist before. So what makes it valuable? Why would we buy it? And an intuition I had actually already in 2020 and that I shared with the brands, and that I think is probably the reason why digital art with NFT works so well, is that with NFT, you have all the components that you have in art. With art, NFTs have a lot of the characteristics that you have in actual art, which are, for instance, so art is tradable. When you buy a piece of art, you can resell it. It's the same with digital art. With NFT, digital art become tradable. You can own it, you can resell it. Another characteristic in art is that the piece that you buy is unique. And that's the concept of non-fungible. If you have two Picasso together, you can't really mix them to create, to say it's two times one unit. They have their own value, they are unique. So digital art with NFT has also this potential of creating, you buy something that is unique. It's also something that you collect. There is a lot of collectors around the world that collect art, and you can do the same with NFT. And actually, a lot of people consider that the biggest part of the NFT sales and transactions are actually NFT of collectors collecting NFTs. You also have, and maybe that's the downside of it, but it's something that already exists in art. It's also an investment, speculation, or even in some case a way to like have some I would say tax advantage if you want to move money from one country to another, etc. You have all that also in NFT, all the financial aspect around art, which can be auction, we can be investment, we can be all this. You can also have it with digital art thanks to NFT. So that's a lot of reasons to actually buy those NFTs that are NFTs for digital art. And then for the other use cases, so in case of a club, if you want to become part of a club and you have this membership for clubs, let's say in London, for instance, you would do the same to be part of a community online. That's a reason to buy an NFT, for instance.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I think, no, that's perfect. Thanks for giving that explanation. I'd like to go to Peter now, and from your own experiences working with companies, working on NFT related projects, could you add to this and tell us a few more cases from your own experience of how companies can work together with NFTs? And then Nathalie, after that, I'll ask for your reaction from a legal perspective on all of these different cases that we've heard about from Isabelle and from Peter.
Sure. So one project that I'm tracking right now is the Bud Light Next project, which is a product launch. It's a new campaign. They've launched a new drink. It's a zero carb beer. And instead of the traditional mechanism, which was do your product and then hire a public relations firm and an agency to run a campaign, which would cost, for a large company, in the millions of dollars potentially. In this case, they issued an NFT. It was a generative art, so they didn't commission an artist. This is actually computer-generated graphics. They sold quite a number, I think it was 10,000, and they raised $5 million doing it. So this is phenomenal, right? It completely changes the way you do product launches. They also launched a Discord, which is, this platform that allows the community to talk to each other. And in January, there were no people in that Discord because it didn't exist. Now there are more than 15,000 people. So you can spin up these communities pretty quickly. You use the NFTs, generate revenue. Now the question becomes, how does that help you with your product campaign? Well, there's lots of ways. So the first thing that they announced was a VIP tour for holders of these NFTs to their brewery in St. Louis. And you can imagine, Bud Light sponsors lots of festivals and concerts. You can imagine that if you own this NFT, in the future, you're going to be eligible to be able to attend these. So what's really interesting is the NFT, again, as I go back to this question, are you just buying the art? Actually, no. In many cases, there are all these additional benefits that you can gain from joining that community, right, through the NFT. So I think the interesting thing is is the innovation that's going to take place where brands are beginning to realize, wow, this is a whole new way of launching my products, leveraging NFTs to provide value, but also generating a community that actually owns part of that. And if this product becomes more successful, those early owners can actually gain in the value of the appreciation of that asset over time. So lots of interesting things about how companies can leverage NFTs to drive new product launches.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So what would you say is really if you were to have to pick, let's say, just one aspect of NFTs that makes them the best suited instrument for sort of helping companies do this compared to other things they could have done, other forms of marketing they could have done, other things they could have issued? What is it about NFTs that makes them special for this purpose?
I think it's moving into what people are now calling Web3, which is the decentralization and tokenization and ownership. So in the past, a consumer was the end recipient of advertising, attention getting that the company had to get. Suddenly now with NFTs, the recipients or the buyers of the NFTs become owners in that. So it changes the dynamic in really fundamental ways. And if you look at it from a platform strategy perspective, you're thinking, wow, that opens up new ways of creating network effects. And we know that network effects are driving tremendous value for companies that understand how to leverage them. So I think that the NFTs become a means for driving network effects.
Great, thanks for sharing. So Nathalie, as a legal expert, I'd like to hear your sort of take on these different use cases and different examples of how companies have interacted with NFTs. One thing I'm interested in is your perspective on, for the buyers of NFTs, are there expectations of what they are buying consistent with what, from a legal perspective, they're actually buying? What do you think about that? And also your general reaction on these initiatives and where they fall.
Okay, from the point of view of the buyer, in fact, it depends what he buy. I totally agree with Isabelle or Peter on the fact that could be a very big opportunity for companies, for example, in the case of trademark, to launch in another perspective the new mark, and obviously for the company it's a very good tool, if I can use this word, to make like a sort of tech washing and to prove that they are very innovative in a sort of way. But I am obliged to just give a less, how to say it, enthusiastic point of view, and to just give some legal aspect. Obviously, if you are buying an NFT, you need to be very careful of what you are buying, because if you are, for example, buying a digital piece of art, there is no problem with that. But if you are thinking you are buying a digital piece of art, and in fact you are just buying just a tiny part of the image of this digital piece of art, it's quite different. And for that, I think there is a necessity to keep in mind that we are not in the Far West. There is no place for a non-legal exchange in this area, and I think all the different traditional legal regulation for consumer, for IP law, for tax law, I saw a question on tax, are applying in case of NFT. Even it's on blockchain, and there is a lot of very useful case or useful cases. I saw on the Q&A question that some people are asking for the use, for example, in the music area, and there is a very useful cases to follow and to prove the authenticity, for example, of a piece of music, or to follow, in fact, the different resale of a piece of art. But even this is a part of a very useful usage of the NFT. You have to follow the IP rights and all the rights on the underlying. So in fact, if you are selling just the ownership of something, there is no problem for the legal aspect. If you are selling something else, you need to follow the rules of this something else. So I think we need to be not too optimistic with the NFT, and to keep in mind that as at this time, the blockchain was a very important buzzword for the company, and they use blockchain in a lot of cases where the blockchain was not so useful. I think it's quite the same. Even there is some very useful application, everything can't be on token, to make in a tokenization on NFTs.
Okay, can I ask you to give a specific example of, let's say, a pessimistic sort of application of NFTs that we've seen that maybe is something you would be looking out for?
Okay, so there is actually there is at least 2 cases where the NFT are using in a maybe a fraudulent way. For example, in the case of trademark, you have this case of the use of the Hermes brand, the Birkin bag, and this application, which is made by the artist Rothschild, Mason Rothschild, who replicate, in fact, the image of the very famous bag. And in this case, in fact, the NFT was made on something which is not the own property of the one who made the tokenization. So in this case, you can have a conflict between the right on the NFT, which is obviously existing, and the right on the object, which is put on the NFT, which is registered on the NFT. So in this sort of case, it could be dangerous to admit the NFT. You have also the other case, and I'm going very quickly on this, of this Richard Prince artist who sold the picture of the very famous model Emily Ratajkowski, and she to fight against this appropriation of his picture, she create a tokenization on this first image. But it's all the question, it's a very IP nightmare, in fact, because it's all the question of the property and the ownership of the first picture, and on the picture which is reproduced on Instagram and on the NFT, and at least owned by different people. So, and you have obviously the personal right of the model. So in this sort of case, it could be a very big nightmare in the legal aspect. So that's a sort of illustration of the problem with the NFT. Even I don't want to condemn all the application, but we have to be realistic with some of them.
Gotcha. So I'd like to move now. Isabelle, I was just about to call on you, please.
Yes, just to add on the risk around NFT, and I see a lot of questions in the chat on the topic around money laundering. One question from Christos Tramphoukis, and I think there are other questions around that. So yes, there is a big risk that one of the reasons why some NFTs were sold at a very high price were people trying to kind of launder crypto profits. Because as some of you might be aware of it, the crypto market has been crazy in the last, I would say, 18 months, with Bitcoin price going from $3,000 almost during the COVID crisis to $60,000 last year. And with that, a lot of crypto went crazy, and a lot of people became crypto millionaire suddenly. And had a lot of money that they wanted to basically declare, a lot of gain, and some might have used actually NFT to do that. So yes, I think it exists, and it's something that some brands might be vigilant about. And also to come back to also the question from the anonymous attendee that posted the question that has a lot of likes. Are those purchases genuine? Some of them might not be that genuine, or they might be, but what's true and what's public, for instance, with the Dolce & Gabbana sale that happened a few months ago. So I don't know if you've been aware of it, but in September, they did a sale of digital clothes for almost $5 million worth at that time, with only 9 pieces. they sold for $9 million of NFT. So half of them were NFT and a physical item, but half of them were just NFTs represented a digital garment, and they were sold at crazy prices. And one of the people, and a lot of the, well, some of the people who participated were public, gave their, well, public identities, but we don't know who's behind. But some of them are like crypto people and NFT collectors that already have a lot of NFT. And are those people genuine, or are they influencer, or we don't know, but it's true that there are a lot of people who own a lot of crypto, that buy a lot of NFT, and that are pushing this market very much, and that are absolutely key in explaining how we reach such high prices for some items.
Thank you, Isabelle. So I'm wondering, Peter, in reaction to this, if you were, let's say, working together with a company and you wanted to make sure they can launch an NFT safely, that they can do a good job with it, how would you recommend taking into account some of these elements?
I was actually just writing a response to that very issue in the chat. One of the big questions is it worth buying this particular NFT? And that has to do with expectations of future payout, right? Which could be, hey, this artwork is so good that a lot of people are going to come in and want it. Or it could be, you believe that brand and their commitment to future value, right? And so it gets into this, and you probably know this literature around credible commitments, right? How credible is the project leader in being able to deliver future value? And I think some brands kind of sign up for this. The marketing team says, hey, this is a cool idea. And they launch it. And you know, the typical mentality for marketing is you launch these campaigns and then they're one and done, right? Whereas NFTs last forever. And so the brands need to think about what is the long-term strategy for delivering value for that NFT. Otherwise, you're going to lose people's confidence and they're going to start to sell and the market will crash. So there's a pretty delicate balance for community building, which can be fantastic for your brand, but it needs investment, right? And it needs a comprehensive community-based strategy for thinking about how that long-term utility is going to be delivered. But if you get it right, it will feed on itself, right? Where you get positive reinforcing network effects. The better the utility, the more people come, creating more demand, generating more revenue, that you can do better events and things of that nature that attract people, or new projects and rewards and things of that nature. So these things need to be thought of not as one-off campaigns, but as long-term strategies for building relationships with not just customers, but your community that you're developing around them.
So Peter, could you give us an example of a project that you have worked on, or one that you've seen, which has done a very good job at this?
Well, I would say it's super early days, right? These projects are less than a year old in many cases. And so I think, you know, it's hard to say. So, you know, the Coke project, for example, didn't really build a community around it. It was an auction. People, you know, a crypto whale basically bought the artwork and it was done. Versus something like the Kia America project, which is around dog adoption. You know, after COVID, people, you know, there's a lot of dogs now that don't have homes. And so they're building a project around adopting an NFT, which is kind of a cute little robot dog. But the money then goes to a charity that is helping with matching dogs with new homes. And so I think those kinds of projects can probably derive longer term value, but it requires, you know, longer term commitment on the part of the brand to sustain that.
Gotcha. Okay, so I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll look more into the Q&A and see if there's anything from there that we can address. So please feel free also, if you want to contribute more questions to the Q&A. We might adopt even a random choice strategy to give some of the questions that were submitted later also a chance to be answered. But for Nathalie, I want to ask you from a regulatory perspective, Are regulators thinking about NFTs? Have there been cases with specific companies that have been in trouble with regulators? Where is this going from the regulatory standpoint in your perspective? And of course, examples are better.
Yeah, in fact, we are in a situation where for the moment, we have some regulation. So because digital asset, it's not a new object, we have already some regulation we can use to regulate the NFT and to regulate basically, or to enforce the right, the IP rights, for example, in the case that we are using NFT for IP, for piece of works. And obviously in the case that Isabelle mentioned, in the case of trademark, we can use all the IP rights on trademarks. But more specifically, actually some regulators are thinking about a more specific regulation. For example, in the European Union, they are thinking about regulation directive on crypto assets. So to be more specific and to resolve the specific difficulties, for example, in the question of the tax and the question of the ownership and the repartition of the rights between the different protagonists on the NFT operation. And I think it's quite important to have at least one very clear qualification and definition of what is an NFT, because the use cases are very different and various. It's quite complicated, in fact, if we just try to take just one legal definition, because if we take a too large definition, everything could be an NFT, which at the moment it is registered in a smart contract with this non-fungible aspect. So, and it's not the good way to make the regulation, or we take a too specific definition and we will forget some use cases and let out of the law some very useful situations. So I think it's important for the regulator now to think very quickly as well, not to be late to regulate, but to think very precisely the different use case we can have and to give the better regulation we can. So they are working on it.
Gotcha, thank you. Okay, so moving into now some of the questions. So there's a question here from Thabo Limema. How do NFTs fit into the metaverse? I remember seeing an article a while ago that even the companies that are saying they're entering the metaverse don't know what exactly they mean by the metaverse. But I'm curious about your perspectives, and I'd like to ask Isabelle for this one. I've seen examples of fashion metaverse stores and things like this. What do you think is the connection between the NFT and the metaverse, as what people mean by that?
Sure. So well, I had the opportunity to work on the topic recently, and it's a topic that I love because I'm a digital native and a gamer. So Metaverse, first of all, it's a kind of video game that is open and permanent. So it exists even when you are not in the Metaverse. So that would be the definition that I would give. And the link between Metaverse and NFT. So one way to see that potentially is so Metaverse could be a dystopia. It could be a nightmare, like being on your screen all day and become dependent of a company providing this kind of service and locking you up in this universe could be a dystopia. And one of the objectives of Web3, so it's not only NFT, but all blockchain-based assets, is to make those metaverse more open, decentralized, and such that people who use those metaverse have actually a real ownership on their own assets and are not just being the client of one provider of a service, basically. And so Web3 is trying to make those metaverse not a dystopia, but an utopia. And NFT are a key component of what those metaverse could be with Web3, because they create those unique assets that you can actually own. So in a video game, for instance, you could own a sword that would be much more powerful so that you can fight more enemies. So this sword could be an NFT, and it's already the case in some emergent games. so that you could trade it yourself the way you want. Even outside of the game, you could trade it and you would not depend on a third party to actually own it or resell it. And that's basically giving back ownership to the user on the metaverse.
Thanks. Yeah, I think we didn't even talk much about this sort of gaming use case, which is in many ways one of the clearest sort of connections between NFTs and sort of owning digital items. So for Peter, I have this question from another anonymous attendee, which was asked more recently. I do understand the potential for brands and well-known artists. However, what about emerging artists who don't necessarily have the means to invest in resources to make an NFT project successful? So the overarching question is, to what extent do you think the NFTs space will sort of benefit larger organizations, or is it something that can enable smaller creators as well to benefit from it?
There's going to be wild success stories of people who get it, experiment, and drive, new offerings and ways of connecting through NFTs. So for emerging artists, they need to understand community building, need to understand which platform and projects to engage with. And then, over time, they could potentially build partnerships with brands that are interested in supporting them. So there is an NFT project where a large brand is showcasing emerging artists. So I don't think it's an either or situation. It goes both ways. Sometimes big brands want to work with large artists because they have well-established fan bases. The problem is they're not necessarily crypto savvy fan bases. And so there's this expectation, or there's a kind of a false assumption that, oh, that artist has a huge fan base, that's going to benefit us. Well, actually, there's a lot of onboarding and friction that takes place in taking people who are used to operating in, Web 2 world into the Web 3 world. And so there's other, there has a fervent fan base of people who are crypto natives and love that space, and companies that have moved in there have found a whole new audience. So I think it's a very fluid situation right now. And I can't give you a definitive answer because I think there's opportunities in both if you understand the landscape and how to navigate it well.
Great, thank you, Peter. So thank you, everyone. We're nearing the end of this webinar. I hope we were able to give an overview of different perspectives on NFTs, including from the legal side, some of the things to be aware of and cautious of when interacting with NFTs, as well as from the business side, how brands can potentially benefit, which brands have already benefited, how can buyers of NFTs think about what they're buying. But I should also emphasize that this is a very new field and it's evolving very quickly. So I think we're going to see more and more use cases. And right now we're in a phase where there's a lot of experimentation. Over time, it will probably refine, and we'll have a better sense of what are the things that work and what are the things that don't work so well. So hopefully we can all stay in touch on this topic. Very happy to connect with anyone who's interested or has their own thoughts and ideas. Thank you once again to all the panelists. And just a reminder to keep track of our INSEAD NFT related scholarship initiatives. Please check the chat and register your interest there. But that's all from me. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day, and let's all stay in touch.
Thanks so much, Pavel. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.